welcome everyone to the Australian Centre on China in the World's special lecture today. I would like to begin by formally acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the many lands on which we meet today across this ancient continent, now called Australia. Where I am in Canberra, that's Ngunnawal Ngambri country. I recognise their continuing connection to land, to waters and to community, and I acknowledge that they represent the oldest living culture. I also pay my respects to their elders and leaders, past, present and emerging. It's great to see so many people turning up today, and I'm assuming that for many of you, Professor Scott Rozelle needs no introduction, but I'm going to give one anyway. He is quite simply a giant in the fields of Chinese poverty, inequality, rural development and human capital, with a publication record over 30 years that basically defies belief. Today I checked out his CV, in fact, and he's already co-authored 20 articles in 2020 alone on topics including the impact of baby-friendly practices on breastfeeding duration, the safety of eyeglasses wear among middle school students, the impact of parental migration on early childhood development, and also the rather depressing topic of the relationship between depression and academic performance. He's published in so many top journals, including Science, Nature, and the American Economic Review on these and many other topics that link into the focus of his talk today. Scott is currently the Helen Farnsworth Endowed Professor at Stanford University, where he also directs the Rural Education Action Project. He's also Senior Fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. For the past 20 years, he's been the chair of the International Advisory Board of the Centre for Chinese Agricultural Policy at Peking University. And among these and many other extensive achievements, he has been the recipient of numerous honours and awards, including a 2008 Friendship Award by then Premier Wen Jiabao, the highest honour that can be bestowed on a foreigner, and that I think puts him on a par with Vladimir Putin, among others. Today we will be hearing about his latest book, co-authored with Natalie Hell, entitled Invisible China: How the Rural-Urban Divide Threatens China's Rise. Scott plans to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for 25 minutes or so of Q&A. And at that point, if you're brave enough and willing to, please do put your hand up in the chat box and we will pass the mic to you. Or if you'd like to write questions down there and have them read out anonymously, either by me or Scott, then that would be fine too. So without further ado, I really am honoured and delighted to pass the mic over to Professor Scott Rozelle. Thanks.
Good. Jane, thank you. I see some friends there. I think there's John and Anita. I think I visited them in 1990, and I was a brand new assistant professor, and they took me under their wing in the whole China field, and many others there. I told Jane that it used to be that there was nobody in Australia that studied China, well, at least no economists, right? They were sociologists, right? But I used to get invited every year to come to Canberra and to go to, and now there's more economists studying China in Australia than the United States, I think. So, yeah, none of us do a very good job on U.S.-China relations or Australian-China relations, but that's the IR people. That's Jane tells me. So I agree there, Jane. Good. Let me share my screen, and okay, here we go. Yeah. So let me run through this, and I would really very much like with the China group there, get your input, get your reaction, and really look forward to a discussion. So I'll try to get through these as quick as I can. I start this off, I'm in the US now, right? And maybe you got to say this in Australia too. This isn't a China bashing book. Maybe I say it to protect myself in China. But it isn't. I mean, I've been doing field work in rural China for 40 years. I know so many people there. I don't want China to have a collapse because it'll be the rural low income, the rural poor that are going to be hurt the most. I also worry that a China stagnation would hurt China, the U.S., Australia, the world, for the overall good. I'm not one of those IR guys, Jane, but they tell us, if China's legitimacy is based on growth and prosperity, if there is a fall, a stagnation, what does the leadership do to raise its legitimacy? And you could think of a lot of wagging the dog stories. Now, what I want to say is for China, I want China to succeed, but I want it to be fair, cooperative, all-encompassing. And I think that the Biden administration coming in, is the number one thing they need to do is try to get this coalition together of the EU, Australia, Japan, Canada, and go to China and say, let's renegotiate this whole thing. It has to be fair for China, but it has to be clean. So as we see, what China does is they pick off countries one at a time. Australia illustrates that probably as good as well as any illustration. So that's the background of this book. You guys know what Invisible China, it is rural China. And it's, 60% of 1.4 billion, right? That's, a 1/9. I just was corrected the other day, 1/9 of the world's population. 1 out of every 9 people live in this. And it's, the workers, right? And it's the self-employed. I want you to remember these self-employed informal economy workers. They're gonna surface in a few minutes as I try to show you where China's heading. And these guys are starting to disappear. Then there's the farmers. You only need so many farmers, out there. But they're part of the story, right? And then the elderly, the left behind, the families that hide in the alleyways of the big cities, right? These are the invisible China. Now, when I started working there way after John and Anita, right? But not long after them. And when I first started going in the 1980s, right, more than 85% of Chinese lived in rural communities. And, students, professionals, government officials, everyone came from a farming community, it seemed. And they went back and forth, right? They had their daytime jobs and the weekends, their families, their parents, their grandparents were all back in the villages. So everybody knew what was happening there. When, we used to take forever to go across China. They had a horrible bus system, road system, and you'd go a province and a half, and then the bus would stop for the night in a little inn, and you'd be in a restaurant. That people knew that, right? Rural China wasn't invisible 40 years ago. But look at today, right? If you don't fly across China, you take this high-speed rail. I love to take photos. You can't even take a photo of a village going 350 kilometers an hour through it. I mean, it blurs. And that it's, we see every day the Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen media, social media posts and everything. While how much time do we spend on these guys, right? And they're really visual. And I give this talk in China, and it's I tell people this is the biggest problem China has. ... Now, China has lots of problems, right? But this is the biggest problem China has, I think, that no one knows about, or they just haven't thought through it about. Okay, I don't need to say, you just gave such a nice introduction, Jane. Thank you. When I got my friendship award in 2008, Wen Jiabao asked me, there was a little pre-ceremony, how many counties I'd been to. And at that time, I'd been to 400 or so. And he said, go out and count them and then count every new one you've ever been to. He retired with 1,120 counties. His son, his grandson was one of our interns. I've been to 652 now, and collected data. We think we've done over 1 million surveys. So, now, you know, you say I publish a lot. I haven't collected a survey since about 1995. My collaborators do. So this is our group doing this, right? And yeah, here, this looks like my son here, right? Now it's actually me in 1988, right? And look at the village. I would go across the village and there'd be 100 kids following me, right? You don't see that at all anymore. There's lots of kids, but they now live in boarding schools, right? And their parents are living in the cities. And and to do our work, you know, we collaborate with universities in Western provinces. You know, you can't, you can't do, there's no survey companies, there's no NGOs, there's no foundations that can really work with you. So, you know, we have to use our collaborators and send students down to implement our projects and then collect our data. So this is sort of the basis of the book. Okay. I just want to show that to you. Okay, so let's get to the heart of it. Why would the invisible China threaten China's rise? And I think this is a really important graph, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on graphs here, but here, this horizontal axis is income 60 years ago, okay? And here's income today, okay? And so these countries down here, right, this is the Myanmar, the Congo, right? They were poor 6 years ago, they're poor today. And then here we are, you know, OECD countries, right? The Canadas, Norway, Sweden, France. I would say maybe this is Australia after your China. No, Australia's up in there too, right? Okay, I want to think about two groups of countries, okay? I want to think about the graduates. So these are the countries that were middle income 60 years ago and they're high income today, right? This is obviously what China wants to do, okay? And what I want you to do is notice two things. First of all, there's not very many of them, okay? I mean, count them, 15 of them, you know, and they aren't all countries, right? Taiwan territory, right? A little Hong Kong province, I think, right? And the Republic, you know, South Korea, Ireland, Israel, right? And the second thing is no country has done it for the past 20 years, okay? So this is a really hard thing to do. And I think people have to keep that in mind, okay, as we think about China. Now, the other group of countries are these guys, right? I mean, these are, look at most of the countries in the world are trapped, right? That they were middle income 60 years ago, they're middle income today. And that's not to say they're living in harmony, right? It's like they grow, collapse, grow, stagnate. And during these stagnations and collapses, right, there's a lot of people in those countries that get hurt. Now, the one thing is most of them are Colombia, right? Turkey, Brazil, right here. Brazil almost made it. They're big, most are smaller, medium-sized countries. So when they collapse, we don't feel it that much around the world, right? So that's, but that's it. So what I want to do is try to understand what's the difference between these guys and these guys. And remember in 1960, they're all the same. They're all in the same box. And these guys were able to move up, but these guys stayed there. So one fundamental difference between these guys and these guys is at the time of middle income, so, you know, 1970s, 1980s, in those graduates, the entire level of human capital of the whole labor force, 18 to 65, right? I mean, the wage rate in South Korea is $2 an hour, but the whole labor force was already educated. They at least had a high school education. So that's the OECD. That's one of OECD's variables, measures of healthy labor force, healthy human capital is the share of your labor force that has at least been to high school, because remember, OECD is the rich countries of the world, right? And in a rich country economy, right, if you don't have a high school education, you're going to have real trouble participating in that economy, okay? And so let's look at it here. OECD countries, okay? 10 people in the labor force, 7 to 8 have been to high school. There's a few people that haven't been to high school. You need a few people, right? You can deal with them, right? They have problems. They're part of your social security system, social support system. You need some that are unskilled workers, but most people in these economies are high school or above. Now let's look at the graduates. The graduates already at middle income, remember this is when they were middle income, already looked like OECD countries. They had already educated everyone in their labor force, not everyone, 7 or 8 out of 10 in their labor force to the high school level, even though everybody's working in factories, but they've already sent them to high school. Then they graduate, and of course, they can productively work in that. But now let's compare them to the middle, to the trap, to those red dots in the middle, and look at the Turkeys, the Brazils. On average, only 3 out of 4, while 6 to 7 out of 10 are what we call high school dropouts, or they've never been to high school, right? And you know, in the United States, I don't know what it is in Australia, but in the United States, if you haven't been to high school in the United States, there's 5 times more likely that you're going to be in jail, have a criminal record, Social Security, you're on welfare, you're on disability, you're unemployed, then you have a middle income stable life. Okay, I mean it's 5 to 1. It's not good to be a high school dropout in a high income country. It's not a problem in a middle or low income country, right? There's lots of jobs, but when you try to move up, right? And look at the difference. The grads and twice as many of the share of these economies have been to high school, okay? And just to summarize, because when you go from middle income to high income, those low wage, low skill jobs leave. The only ones that are left are high wage, high skill. And if a large share of your labor force can't do those jobs or can't learn those jobs, you get this polarization, right? A rise of unemployment, a rise of informality, high crime, social unrest. And of course, then the supply side starts to, you know, you don't want to invest there anymore. You have an absence of qualified workers, and you get this sort of stagnation and more polarization, and you get this, you stay in this trap for 60 years. Now, there's other reasons you're in there, but I think this has been an overlooked factor, okay? What happens, so let's just think, then we'll get to China. What happens when a large share of labor forces sink into this informality? And look at, we're talking, right, Argentina, you know, 60%, Brazil's 40%, right? And they've been going up and down. But, you know, Indonesia is up to 70%, Ecuador, India, Mexico, right? These are classic middle income trapped countries. Between 40 to 60% of their labor force, and they just can't keep them, you know, this is what they do. They don't productively contribute to the economy. There's no there's no working hours. There's no regulation. There's no social security, social services given to them, and they tend to you know, undermine. Santiago Levy will say, think about Mexico. This is a really good book, by the way. So what he's going to tell us is, look at Mexico. Think about this. Think about maybe China. Mexico has solid macro performance. China. Mexico has export success. China. China has accumulated physical capital. China. Okay. Mexico, on the other hand, once they got, you know, remember they were admitted to OECD. They were a high income country, but what happened? Since 1994, growth has been almost zero, and productivity has stagnated. Santiago Levy, he used to be a Harvard professor. Now he's at the Inter-American Development Bank, and he says their informal sector is too large. It's persistent informality. It's the rise of crime that it causes and stagnating productivity. And you can see, look at Mexico. I mean, it's that most of the people in the Mexican economy, don't have the education to be in an OECD rich country. So there are so many people today that when they listen to the argument I'm making, or Natalie and I make in the book, they say, I tried to write an op-ed for the Washington Post, and they came back and they wrote one word: hasn't China already made it not interested? Okay, and then, I wrote back, I said, but remember what they said about Mexico in the late 1980s. It was in OECD. Mexico, when I was in grad school, we studied Mexico because it was the next Taiwan, right? It had grown at about 7 to 10% a year for about 15 years in a row, and it had made it, right? And look at what happens. Okay, so enough of the background, okay? And let's look at China now. And China is right here. It's clearly middle income, here, and it's trying to go up this way. This is 2008. It's about right here. It looks like it's a little behind Brazil here, right? I mean, Brazil is here, and then it fell back here, right, in the last 3 years. But, China's trying to push up here. So where is China in this human capital measure? Okay, and this is where, even if I get this at Tsinghua or the Shanghai Chamber of Commerce or a foundation meeting in Shenzhen, people gasp at this. And they say, China actually has the lowest level of human capital in the middle income world. Number one, I would say China's number one, low. Okay, and they go, look, and of course, I just told them I collect all my data, and they go, well, Scott, that's your data, and then I say, no, that's not my data. That's this census of, actually the micro census was 100 million people that they did in 2015. So this is a little 100 million person survey. So look at, for like every 50-year-old in the country, right? Some say not very many 50-year-olds have never been to school. 30% have only been to primary school, and you can see 60% have only been to secondary school. And if we extract everybody that's been to high school or above, that we see that it's only 30%, right? So 30% of the total secondary attainment by the total labor force, okay? And how does it compare to the rest of the world? I would say China has a lower level of human capital than South Africa, okay, than Turkey, right? Exactly. Not to say Mexico, right? And this means that the labor force is about 800 million. This is 560 million high school dropouts in China. Oh, wait a minute. They haven't even been to high school. You're here if you attended one semester of high school. Okay, so that China has 560 million people that have never stepped a foot into high school in their labor force. Okay, and they're these high school dropouts. And so the question is, if China's going to become this high income superpower, what do they do with 560 million high school dropouts? Sure, they need a lot of people to deliver your Starbucks drink, and they need a lot of people to be nannies and to work in rest homes, but they don't need 560 million of them. I will guarantee you that. Okay. So this is the evidence. This is brand new evidence. This actually isn't in the book. Most of everything else I've done is in the book. And this is also data from the Chinese government. And I found this just remarkable when, I saw that. So this is data from 2004 till today. And look at back in 2004, about 70%, 65, 7 out of 10, most people in China's workforce was working for the was working for the formal employment company. They worked for a company in a factory. They got, they didn't get very high wages, right? They didn't get a lot of benefits, but they were managed under the whole system, okay, that they were part of the system. But look what's happened over the last 15 years. It's now almost 40%. So only 40%. So take the inverse, 60% of China's labor force today is informal jobs, okay? That there's no hours, that there's no benefits, they aren't part of the system, right? That they're out there. And you can see these lines here is that the formal sector is actually falling. So the informal sector is growing faster and the formal sector is actually going down now. And you can see it maybe even clearer in this graph what's happening. Manufacturing is going down. Construction has peaked and going down. Agriculture isn't going up. In fact, they're trying to push big farms. So, right? So agriculture is going to go down. And so what do we have here? Yes, we have skill-intensive services are going up. That's good. So those are the professionals, right? The doctors, the investment bankers, the accountants, and venture capitalists. Okay, they're going up, and that's good. But look what's rising the fastest. Informal labor-intensive services. They're just skyrocketing. And why? Well, it's because anybody that gets laid off of their manufacturing job, they go over to the service sector. Anybody that laid off their construction job, they're going over to the service sector. And new entrants, they only have one choice, right? And so this, and you can see what's happening because so many people are entering this sector. Yeah, the demand for services is rising, but look what happened to wage rates in this informal sector. It's falling. Professional wages are going up. I show this in California and everybody goes, this looks like the U.S. economy, right? Where we have two sectors, right? We have the rising, informal sector or low wage sector where wages are falling, and you have the Silicon Valley sector where wages are going up, right? And of course, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. It's just starting in China, right? And so what's driving these trends, right? So what's really happening? Well, you know what's happening, right? It's robots, right? Automation, right? All those guys that we saw in that first picture, they're being replaced by these guys. Here's globalization, right? If I could stand up and show you my Levi jeans I'm wearing, they were made in Ethiopia. Right? They were made in China 5 years ago. Chinese firms. I just went on a trip. I gave a talk at a conference in Bangladesh about Chinese investment into the Dhaka export zone. They call it the Little China, the Deng Xiaoping export zone in Dhaka, and it's Chinese companies coming in over there to take advantage of labor. And of course, Samsung now, produces all of its electronics, assembles electronics in Vietnam, right? And so, right there they go. And of course, the recession has made this worse, right? And so should we expect more in the future? This is a graph by Hongbin Lee, my colleague here at Stanford, and look at the number of robots. Look at this, the rise. By 2020, which is right now, China, it's accelerating rate, has more robots than all of the rest of the world combined, okay? And this is what they're hanging over Germany. Germany is shipping them all these automation equipment, and they're saying we're not going to buy them from you anymore, Germany, right? And so this is the coal and iron of Germany, right? And I know we don't say made in 2025 anymore. That was but it's still there. And if you saw the new plenum output, it's basically automate, technology, right? And global supply chains are going to continue to shift, for better or for worse. So should we expect more in the future? You bet, right? I mean, I think for sure this is going to continue. And so there's offsetting forces, right? If unskilled workers are starting to fall, is this going to slow automation? Is it going to slow globalization? Yes, right? Unless the central planner, doesn't respond to prices and they just want to technology. So I think this is a real thing to watch closely, right? And globalization. China is not letting their companies go to Bangladesh anymore, but will the foreign firms move? So let me. I don't want to spend too much time. I'm going to skip and close here. But people often ask me at this point in time, "Come on, Scott, you aren't the only one that knows this. Doesn't anybody else in China know this?" Yeah, I mean, China's government is pushing policies, dual circulation economy. They're trying to raise demand, urbanization of 4th and 5th tier cities. Because what they're going to say is they know they're going to have a whole bunch of people that they don't want and they don't need in the cities anymore. Where are we going to put them at, right? And so, the government is trying to do stuff like educate their labor force. Now, the high school students that they produce today, great, but they aren't even going to be 25 for the next 10 years, right? But I think you see by their efforts that they want a universal. By 2020, it's not going to happen, but by 2022, they're going to try to make everybody go to high school. It's not going to help all those 30 and 40-year-olds, right? I just actually saw today a paper by my old colleague, Ji-Kun Huang, who said that China is planning on spending billions on adult retraining. Okay, so all these guys that are getting laid off, they're going to try to train them. I told them we're just finishing a meta-analysis of adult retraining programs around the developing world, and guess what? None of them work. Okay, if you don't have the skills of a high school student that you barely read, you barely write, you're not going to be able to sit there and learn how to learn, right? And, so the problem here is in rural kids, okay? Everybody in urban areas are in high school. Everybody in urban areas already have been in high school. So we don't need to so it's going to be retraining these guys and trying to get the rest of these guys in high school. And look at this. Here's China today, where only 50% of the poor rural areas, so this is Central China, Western China, have ever been to high school, 90% of large cities. Look at South Korea and Taiwan in the 1980s, right? $2 an hour Taiwan wage was. Everyone went to high school. They've been going to high school since the 60s, okay? Look at Mexico in the 1980s. China, Mexico, China, Mexico. Wow, I mean, China looks exactly like Mexico did in the 1980s, right? So in summary, right, the challenge is to get these poor students in high school and to provide job training for these laid off workers. Wow. But the other thing is I can get them into high school, but are they going to learn? Jane, I don't have enough time to do this, but if you read the book, chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, they talk about the poor level of cognition of rural kids, the fact they don't have glasses, that they're still anemic, they got intestinal worms, they aren't even learning when they're in school. So, we can get them into school, but if they get there, they're learning. And if they go on these adult training programs, can they learn? Quite simply, there's a large share of rural people that don't have the skills to learn how to learn. They're really going to have a trouble in this new economy that China is trying to create. What can be done? Yes, I'm optimistic. Remember, I am an optimistic economist. Barry Naughton and I and Huang Yaosheng were in a conference in 2007, and we were talking about how China went from poverty to middle income you know, better than any country in the world, and everybody scolded us for rose-colored glasses. My glasses have tinted clear as I don't see a lot of things. No, I mean, let's start now. Let's don't go to the moon. let's don't make that high-speed rail from Xi'an to Urumqi, right? Take an airplane. They just announced a new high-speed rail from Chongqing to Kunming, and it's 90% through a mountain. You could produce an early childhood development center in every village in China for the amount they're going to spend to get to fly, right? I mean, you know, and then you need a safety net for those who's too late. Mexico didn't have that safety net, and guess what happened, right? A tenth of their labor force went into organized crime, right? A tenth of their labor force migrated to the U.S., right? And China is not going to be able to do that. So watch for these, right? What are they after poverty? Today, hey, everybody saw, today they just announced poverty is zero in China. Poverty is zero. Read Terry Sickler's work on the middle income, and what you're going to find is, you know, the problem is there's 900 million low income people in China. Okay, so now there's no poor, but they're low income. They're the people that are supposed to drive demand, but they have to save everything for catastrophic health insurance. They have to save to get their son married. They have to save for retirement. And so you're going to move them back to these fourth and fifth tiers. They're low income. They aren't going to consume any services, right? And so I think that this dual circulation economy, you know, has a lot of econ problems to it. We're going to see, okay? I think one fundamental problem, many of these are invisible. We need to make them visible, and then we can go. So I'm going to stop right there. I've gone a little bit over. I put a few extra slides in there for John and Anita and my other friends. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.